Today, by Barry's request, we are going to make date squares. In Newfoundland, they're often called date crumbles. And apparently, they're a real Canadian thing. They originated in the prairies, and they're originally called matrimony squares, as they were served or created around an engagement, and it was became a tradition to serve date squares or matrimony squares around engagements or weddings and things like that, which I think is pretty cool. But they're extremely, extremely popular on the East Coast, especially in Newfoundland, and they're one of Barry's all-time favorites. So I am going to be using roughly the recipe out of Best of Bridge Comfort Food by Emily Richards. And she is a lady who's here in Guelph, and I've met her, lovely lady. And this particular recipe makes a 9x13 tin, whereas all the other recipes that I've seen make an 8x8 or a 9x9. So that was one reason why I really liked this recipe. The other reason is that it the ingredients are assembled differently. You don't have to crumble the butter and everything with your hands, and it's much, much easier, I find. So I've changed the recipe a little bit. She calls for 2 cups of chopped pitted dates. I don't like a thick filling in my date squares, my date crumbles. I prefer a thinner filling, so I'm only going to use 2 cups, which I have here. Now, we don't have chopped dates, we have whole pitted dates. So I'm still going to follow the directions in terms of, boiling them, simmering them, making them nice and soft in some water and sugar and vanilla. But then I'm going to put them in the food processor to break them up and make it smoother. So if you don't have chopped dates, don't worry, you can chop them if you like, or you can just throw them in a food processor or a blender and break them up that way. So don't let that stop you if you don't have chopped ones. She also called for orange juice, 3/4 of a cup of orange juice and 3/4 a cup of water. When I originally tried it, Barry wasn't too fussy about the orange juice, but if you want to give it a go for it. So I'm just going to do 1.5 cups of water. She also calls for 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Now, if I have lemon in the house, I use it. But when I don't have lemon in the house, I just throw in 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So that's what we're going to do today. So step number 1, wash the hands. Step number 2, preheat your oven to 350. And then step number 3, you need to grease a 9x13 pan. And then put in what we call a sling. So this is parchment paper or wax paper. And basically you need it to be a little longer than what your pan is. And then you just fold it in order to make it fit just the bottom of the pan. So when your date squares are relatively cool, you'll be able to use these like handles and lift them out onto a board or a plate and then cut them. And that way, because when you cut them in the pan, the first one is always destroyed. Plus, you don't have to scratch up your pan if you do have a non-stick pan. So we have that done. And in order to speed up the process a little bit, I pre-boiled the kettle. So we need 1.5 cups of water on top of our 2 cups of dates. I'm going to put the 2 cups of dates in here. And then I'm going to put 1.5 cups of boiling water. That way we don't have to wait for it to come to a boil. We can just simmer it for 5 minutes. So 1.5. There we go. 1.5. And then we have 1/3 of a cup of tightly pressed, tightly packed brown sugar. And we're going to put in our 1 teaspoon of vanilla. There we go. And we're going to do, just a little pinch of salt. There we go. So, excuse me, I'm going to put that on the stove. And we're just going to have that on like a medium low. And Barry, if you wouldn't mind stirring that for me, that would be awesome. Seeing these are his date squares, you know, put them to work. Okay, so now we're going to do the filling. Normally with the filling with date squares, you put in your flour and your cold butter, and then you know, crumble it all up in your hands till it resembles like small peas or like breadcrumbs. In this recipe, we're going to beat together our butter. Now she calls for 1 cup of butter, and I'm going to put in 1.5 cups of butter because I want more butter because it's nice and moist and really yummy. But these are not like things that we have every day. So I'm okay with that. But if you only want to put in 1 cup, that's fine too. So we are going to grab a spoon and put in our softened butter. It calls for room temperature butter, but mine came right out of the fridge, so I put it in the microwave for about 45 seconds. So we don't want it to be melted per se, but of course you want it to be nice and soft. So this is going to get a little loud, so I apologize for that, because we have to beat our brown sugar. So it's 1 cup of lightly packed brown sugar and 1.5 cups of butter. There we go. There, can I put the spatula from over there? There we are. Thank you. Up a little bit. Now the next step is 1 egg. She's the only person I've ever seen put an egg in a date crumble mixture, but it works, so it's all good. So we're just going to crack in 1 egg. There we go. Oops, sorry. And we're going to beat that up. There we are. So that's all we need the mixer for. Now we are going to add in our flour and our oats. And in the flour, I've also added is 2 cups of flour, and I've added 1 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. So that goes in there. And then we have 3 cups. She calls for old-fashioned large flaked rolled oats, but all I've ever used is the quick oats. So 3 cups of quick oats going in. But you can use whatever you like. So now we mix this up. And it will be flaky. It's not going to mix together like a cake batter would. There we go. And you'll notice I'm kind of chopping it. I go from underneath, bring it up, and then kind of chop it, because I'm looking for it to be flaky, crumbly. I'm not looking for it to be smooth. There we are. Almost there. Oops, making a mess, as always. Okay. And I think that's done. Isn't that so much easier than crumbling in your hands and so on and so forth? I was really impressed the first time I made this. Really, really good. Okay, so we are going to put about 1/3, actually bring it back here, about 1/3, or 2/3, I'm sorry, of the mixture in the bottom of the pan. So 2/3 is a little more than half. See if that works. And again, we washed our hands. So this part you want to press down and get a nice base to your date squares. No, we need a little bit more. There we go. A little tiny bit more. Just want a nice even base. Oh, my nose is running a little bit. Excuse me. That's better. Okay, so now we have that done. Now I'm going to wash my hands. I'll be right back, and we are going to put the dates in the food processor. Hi everybody, back again. So we took our dates off of the stove and we put them in the food processor, and we did that off camera because it's a little loud. But really, you know, it was just a couple of pulses and we were done. So there we have our date filling. Oh, that looks so good. Looks so good. It's still very hot. Oops, we don't want that in the bowl. Okay, so I'm just going to spread that around evenly. Or as evenly as we can. There we go. Be careful because it's still really hot. But you could wait for it to cool down. You don't have to do it while it's hot. I think that is even. Okie dokie. Now we're going to sprinkle the other roughly 1/3 over the top. And this doesn't get pressed down. This just gets sprinkled. I'm always concerned that I won't have enough to sprinkle on the top, but I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be all right. I think we're good. Just a little more. And you can always move it around a little bit just to make sure. And as that cooks, that'll all melt down as well, so it's all good. Oh, Mr. Piece, thanks, Barry. Okay, so we're just going to lightly tap it. We're not going to press it. We're going to lightly tap it. And ta-da! She's ready for the oven. So that's going in the oven for about 35 minutes on 350. And once they're cooled off, we'll be back to show you. Hi everybody, back again. Here's our date squares. So in the tin on each side where there's no parchment paper, you want to take your knife and just make sure it's not sticking, which I've already done. And then we're going to use our sling. Barry's going to hold the pan for me. And we are going to lift out our date crumbles. And ta-da! Isn't that cool? Oops, little crumb. So now they're going to cool completely, and because they're still warm. And once they're cooled completely, you can use a knife. I happen to have a pastry cutter, and just cut them into perfect squares. And there you have it. Date crumbles, date squares. Okay, I hope you give it a go. Enjoy. Bye.